Meanwhile, Japan was still making a bid for world power with her undeclared war against China. We didn't know that by the end of 1937, Jap pilots were training for Pearl Harbor as her relatively modern Air Force ruled the sky over China. Other totalitarian nations like Italy were also testing their air forces in actual war on a scale unknown since 1918. Her soldiers and airmen were led into an unwarranted campaign of aggression against her helpless neighbor, Ethiopia, by Premier Benito Mussolini, an accomplished public rabble-rouser. In a country so primitive, there was no real opposition. To Mussolini's pilots, bomb strikes on native troops appeared like flowers bursting into bloom. The day he went before the League of Nations, Haile Selassie knew he would plead in vain. He stated that Italian aircraft had hurled gas and death upon his people and asked if the free world intended to bow before force. A few days later, the League of Nations went out of business.
That's when the American press started wondering why U.S. air power was falling so far behind Italy, France, Russia, and Britain. As a correspondent, I went to the War Department. Air Corps leaders showed me what they were doing with limited funds. I was surprised to find that working with American industry, the generals had started planning a long-range heavy bomber as early as 1933. Specifications had asked for an aerial dreadnought of tremendous capabilities. These requirements of speed, range, load, and ceiling had posed many problems for the designers. I discovered that among the models submitted was this revolutionary design from Boeing calling for 4 engines. If accepted, it would become a flying battleship, 68 feet long with a wingspan of 104 feet. Along with the model, Boeing engineers had prepared a detailed proposal which they submitted to the Materiel Division. Then I learned that in June 1934, Boeing received a contract from the Army for design data, a full-scale wooden mock-up, and complete wind tunnel tests on their proposal. Later, with many changes and suggestions, the Army Inspection Board approved construction of only one experimental plane. But so great was Boeing's faith in their idea, they borrowed money and staked their future on building the single B-17. Because this airplane was being constructed in competition, there was no financial support from the government. Instead, there is considerable skepticism and opposition. Therefore, it was strictly a pioneering venture, even to the wooden scaffolding and the custom-made parts and instruments. Building the first 4-engine bomber was a great gamble. No one would have thought that this maze of metal taking shape in the Boeing plant was to become one of the major weapons to fight for freedom a few years later. June 1935, the men who built her rolled the baby out into the sun. She looked magnificent, so good they called her a flying fortress, and the name stuck. If she worked, the XB-17 would be the biggest single step toward advancement of American air power. Now, would the Army Air Corps accept her? The Giant was groomed and readied for a back-breaking test. At Seattle, the XB-17 pointed its sharp nose to the east and with a great surge of power soared into the air. Past Mount Rainier, the majestically sweeping design with feather-like maneuverability surpassed even the best hopes of its designers. The bomber flew the record-shattering 2,100 miles non-stop in exactly 9 hours at an average speed of 232 miles an hour. The basic Air Corps specifications were met as the plane came to rest at Wright Field, Ohio. For 2 months, Air Corps engineers tested the B-17. Few other planes were equally important in air history. Then came the day of the big test. October 30, 1935. And before the very eyes of the Army brass who had come to decide on it, high hopes were shaken.
Every one of us who had worked for the perfect defense weapon saw our creation go up in smoke. But Air Corps Chief General Westover immediately took up the battle. After several months of investigations, the plane was cleared of any mechanical fault. The B-17 could not be ignored because of an accident. More of these four-engine bombers had to be built. Men and machines went back to work, and American air power marched on. Machinists, metal workers, small parts men, the skilled hands of America's great industrial wealth were back at their benches, performing millions of precision aviation tasks. The contract for construction of a service test fleet of 13 airplanes had been awarded the Boeing Company by far-sighted leaders of the Air Corps. Although this contract was completed with horse and buggy production methods, the dreams of men like Generals Westover and Andrews were being fulfilled. They claimed the airplane had brought into being a different mode of warfare, the application of air power. And with a B-17, they hoped to give America the weapon which could engage any enemy on land, sea, and in the air, destroy his war production and will to fight. However, it wasn't until spring 1937 that this new air power began to arrive, when the first B-17s were delivered to the 2nd Bomb Group.
The Air Corps was finally being equipped with weapons equal to any military planes in design, speed, endurance. Before the end of World War II, production increased 1,000-fold, giving us more than 12,000 flying fortresses. In later chapters, we shall see America's air power grow. And when the big test came in 1941, there was both a doctrine of air warfare and fully tested airplane designs in the strong hands of the United States Air Force.